Great answer. Let's stick to just copper now and donut shapes, because that's what we're saying is what we think is the best way to produce these magnetic fields. And another way in which we see it doing is whether it makes a difference between wrapping it round once, twice, 3 times. Like, how thick do we need this copper to be? How many times do we need to wrap it before it creates a better effect? Is it more the better? It's, how does that work? Because we've opened a few mats, you've opened a few mats, and some of these companies only use like one single strand of copper to make a loop. What's the difference between that and wrapping it multiple times?
The idea is very simple. We're going back to shunting again. Now, I'm going to use a few terms here, and I'll explain them as I go along. If you use only one wire, you're going to get a field being generated around that one wire, right? It's called a left-hand rule, right-hand rules. Like, there's all kinds of stuff. But simply saying, if you just use one wire, you're going to have a field that just gets generated around that wire. Now, let's say we do a second loop. Both wires will have a field being generated around the wire itself, and then they will shunt each other. And all of a sudden, you create more. If the magnetic field is perfectly parallel to each other going in the same direction, it adds. So that means if you make one gauze plus one gauze, now you have 2 gauze. If they go in opposite direction of each other, they cancel. That's the only time the magnetic field interact with each other. Now, if I have 2 wraps, I basically double my EMF because they interact with each other. So if I go to 100 wraps, now I have 100 times that. It becomes an exponential thing because they're always add to each other that way, right? Now, the companies that make very, very small coils, because the smaller the coils, the easier it is to get a high gauze output, which, by the way, means very little by itself. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. So
by small, you mean just an actual small donut shape, don't you? You don't mean just one rind of copper.
Exactly. If I look at it this way, if I have a tiny little flashlight with a tiny little reflector, right, and I have the focus perfect, I can actually have quite a bright light for it. It can have actually like a really bright spot, but it won't do much for width-wise, right? Like for driving, it'd be useless. To illuminate your yard, it'd be also useless, right? So a small coil can make really high gauze really, really, really easily, but there'll be no penetration. There'll be no depth to it. A larger coil is harder to make high gauze because the field has more room to flow around, so it doesn't have to interact with itself as much. So then we have to start adding a lot of wrap so you make it interact with one another.